The Profectory Podcast, Mastering the Mind and Market. Hosted by Manny Teran, we explore what it takes to succeed, both in business and within yourself. From strategy and business growth to mindset and resilience, we provide the tools to lead with clarity, confidence, and wisdom. Welcome to the Profectory Podcast, Mastering Mind and Market. I'm your host, Manny Teran, and on today's podcast, we are exploring the collapse of one of the most celebrated companies in biotech in recent history, and that, of course, is 23andMe. If you're new to this podcast, we're about helping you to navigate the waters of life and business for those high achievers, those entrepreneurs, those business leaders that need the clarity, need the resilience to push forward. We do this using the Stoic philosophy that is embodied by lots of entrepreneurs at many levels, many of the world leaders, many of the people that command Fortune 100 companies are all practicing one form or another of Stoicism. And so we break it down. And today's episode is really about what happened to 23andMe. We look at the Stoic lessons from the fall of this company, and then ultimately we'll give you some things for you as the leader or entrepreneur, how you can really use this as lessons to navigate your own life and in the end, help to change your mindset. So we're going to be doing this in 6 segments to break it down in ways that are easy to digest. Segment 1, the rise and fall. 23andMe was founded in 2006 by Ann Wojcicki and was a breakthrough technology company that emboldened and empowered people to understand their identity and what they were all about. I have lots of family members and friends that took the test and went through the process and were able to understand better where they're from, understand their roots, understand their health, understand if they have some long lost relative. And these are all things that are very powerful in themselves. It's all over the news, and it was something that was definitely a meteoric rise. In 2021, they went public at the valuation of $3.5 billion. At their peak, they were about $6 billion in valuation. So if you can imagine, that was just a few years ago. And if you look at today, March of 2025, they just filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Now, that from 21 to 25, 4-year difference, what could have happened? So their stock is worth that under 20 million at the current value. That's pretty massive fall. So what happened? Well, let's walk it back. In 2023, 23andMe experienced a massive data breach. This was something that shook them to their core. And 7 million customer profiles were compromised. Now, this is people's genetic information. This is not just some random information. This is somebody's life in a way of thinking about it. Not just emails and passwords. We're talking about DNA. And this is something that is worth something in the black market. The fallout was swift. The company basically faced massive public outrage, and they didn't really deal with it in an expeditious manner. There was a $30 million class action lawsuit that they were basically settled, and their stock just plummeted. So all these things combined really led to a lack of trust. If you are spitting in a cup and mailing it off somewhere and getting a result to tell you where you're from or to tell you some genetic disease you might have in the background, there's a very high element of trust there. So trust was broken. Once that trust was broken, the entire thing became unraveled. And that really is what led to the California Attorney General issuing a consumer alert recommending that all users delete their data from the platform. Now, that's a pretty big move from a government group to ask people to do that. And just a few days ago, Wojcicki stepped down as CEO. She will remain on the board and essentially will try to find a buyer that will pick this up literally pennies on the dollar. Now, that really opens a huge door, a conversation, or maybe an argument with the world regarding the data. What happens to the data? And so I'm not going to dive too much into the data side, but I just want to say that if you are a user of this technology, if you actually have an account, you may really want to consider doing something with that data. This is your your DNA. And so be aggressive about that if you need to. But today's episode is really about the Stoic principles that are adjacent to that. So the first of which is the rise and fall. For all these, even in ourselves, we have days we're up and we have days we're down. I have a personal experience of having grown a company very quickly, and it was an amazing time. It was a time of pretty incredible growth. And 6 years later, I was essentially turning the keys back in. And it was a very hard fall. And that hard fall is in part what led me to do this podcast. I did a previous podcast, the Business Trendsetter podcast, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. And I still use a lot of the technology that I acquired when I did that. And I use some of the mentorship from Adam Hartung, my mentor, one of my mentors. But really the piece that kept on coming up is the personal experience, those tools that I had to develop or find to get through those moments, the rise and fall. So you're up and you're down. And so even though she started this company and is now putting it away, I have the utmost respect for her and her courage to do that. Now, I don't think there was anything unethical about what she's done in the past. The data breach is something that just happened. But, when we live in a life of virtue and we're doing our best to live in that life, it should be a celebration. And even though she is basically took a $6 billion company down to 20 million, and here we are, and it's her responsibility, there's no doubt. As a CEO, as a business leader, it is your responsibility. And when my company fell, I could blame our vendors, I could blame our customers, I can blame my employees or whoever. No, it's all about me as the CEO. And that's the hard thing about being a CEO, is you carry that weight. You carry that weight of just things like payroll. You carry the weight of insurance documents. Now you're on the line if something happens. And so I've faced lawsuits, I've faced lots of issues, I've faced issues with HR, with people that are suing me, people that wanted more than I was willing to give. I've had to fire people, but I've also celebrated amazing career growth of my employees. I've helped launch many, many companies from the basin of my company. Other companies started. And so these are all things that I'm very proud of. And so the whole thing, whether it was, quote, positive or negative, is a celebration. And I say, quote, positive or negative because it's all subjective. It's all something that, if you think about all the things that I've done in my life, all the things you've done in your life that you think are bad, are they really? Or is it just your mind telling you they are? Segment 2, Memento Mori in business. Memento Mori is a Stoic principle and Latin phrase that means remember we must die. The idea that we must die is what's given me some kind of the green light to do a lot in business and in life. When I'm sitting on the sidelines and I'm thinking whether I should do something or not, I think about that word, Memento Mori, and I lean into it. Because we must die. We have a limited time on this earth. We need to really put our best effort in. We're going to make some mistakes. We're going to crack some eggs, if you will. But in the end, it takes that kind of confidence and that kind of peace. There is a peace to it, to be able to do things and celebrate the failures, quote unquote. Celebrate the fact that you have bruised and you have cut. But in the end, you forgive yourself, you forgive those who are against you, and you move forward. If you are in the arena, if you've ever been in the arena, you understand what I mean. That arena is a place of, it's quite a spectacle. There is, and I mean the arena of business, right? And the business in life. There is a lot of things that happen. There's personal relationships that get strained. There's new personal relationships that form. You might be sued. You might have to go bankrupt in your own way, in your life, in your personal, in your business. You have issues with vendors. You have issues with employees. But you also have all these beautiful things, like launching careers, like helping your customers do their thing. And so for my company, my personal experience, I've launched probably a dozen companies through my company, meaning former employees of mine have started in my company and they went out and they started their own company, or they went to some higher level place because of the time they spent in our organization. I grew my company very quickly from 0 to 15 employees in just a few years, and it was quite a meteoric rise and an equally meteoric fall. And I don't really hide the fact of how it happened. I lost track of, I didn't listen to my customers. So just very much the same the way 23andMe failed to listen to their customers and lost trust from their customers. My issue was I failed to listen to the market. I was digging my heels into a market where it had shifted already. And that was hubris, right? It was my thing to stand stoic, quote unquote, against what I should have done, which is follow where the market was going. And so that's why this podcast is so powerful, because for me, it is really an eye-opening experience, an exploration of being able to share my experience with the audience in the fact that I've been there and I have lots of scars and lots of spoils to share and to show. And if you haven't been in that arena yet, then hopefully this podcast will help to give you that push into that arena, because the Memento Mori, remember we must die, is that green light you need. Now, if we kind of go back to the angle of 23andMe, it wasn't just the data breach. It was that business model that failed. They didn't have something with recurring revenue. You spit in the cup, you milled it off, you paid your money, and it was done. And they tried sort of not very powerfully to try to create new angles in the business, new wellness models, new things to do with their health, but they didn't really go far enough. And it was kind of an over-reliance in consumer trust. They put all that, and then of course when the data breach came, it all came crashing down. It was the hubris, the fact that they believed they were untouchable, and now we've seen that they've fallen. And just like all these companies that have these rises, they also have falls. Segment 3, the illusion of control. There is a Stoic principle called the dichotomy of control, which purports the fact that we can control certain things and we cannot control other things. And it is when we try to control things that have no ability to be controlled, then we have the angst, then we have the anger, the frustration, and all those other things. So what can we control? We can control our decisions. We can control our actions. We can control how we respond to certain things. We can control our communication. These are all things that are within our control. What we can't control is the market. We can't control market shifts or technology shifts. We cannot control our customers or our consumers or our competitors or employees. And that's the thing about being the boss, is we believe that we need to be in control. That in order to be an effective CEO, we need to be in control so that everything happens the way that we want it to be. And that's when we start to have major issues. When we have major issues internally and we start making bad decisions because we want to be in control and we don't have the full perspective of the world. So somebody might have a better idea of how to take you to that next place. And because you feel like you need to be in control, you silence that conversation. You say, nope, I am in control. I'm the boss, and you're going to listen to me. I have been there, done that on both sides. I have been in situations where I was working for somebody and I saw a major pitfall, major. And I warned this person. They were, I think, in a way, they were a mentor of mine. I think we get mentors in very different places, whether it's a very positive mentor or somebody that shows you what not to do as well. So this person was in business. I was working for this person a long time ago. They were heading down a place where I believed was dangerous and it could really bring the company down. And I warned this person and I warned them again. And the third time, and they kept on saying, no, I got this. No, I got this. Finally, they just said, I'm the boss. You go back to your place. I'm going to deal with this. 2 weeks later, the company went down. And I'm not saying this because, I'm so awesome. I'm saying this because I believe that it is that bias, that is that hubris, that we're untouchable, that can sometimes lead to the downfall of your company. In this case, 23andMe, they could have prepared better. They could have done better. They couldn't control the hackers. That's a fact. But they could have had a stronger process internally to protect the information. There's a lot of things they could have done that would have saved the company. But really, the idea of Stoicism is that it prepares us for hardship, knowing the fact that as much as we will rise, we may also and will fall. And so we have to do this with optimism, with a sense of direction and positive energy. Because if you're the boss and you feel like you need to be in control, you're going to have those hit the wall moments. But if you're the boss and you communicate to your staff and your community the fact that this is the leadership, this is where I'm taking this company, but have that open ear, have the ability to let things flow like water, then you're going to go further faster. And if you really study these really powerful people that are very either in politics or business, even though they're strong and they're driven, they also have a sense of a really good relationship with control. Now, dictators, it's a different thing, but they too also fall, right? And so the idea with 23andMe is, what's the worst that can happen? And are we ready for it? And it happened, and they weren't ready for it. So we'll see in the next coming months what happens with this bankruptcy. And the idea is, if your business is built on data, wouldn't you make sure that the fortress is impenetrable for that data? And I wouldn't even call this an accident. I mean, if you look at the Titanic, was that really an accident, or was that just misfortune? Was that just hubris on the part of the captain and the staff? If you study the Titanic, you understand that it wasn't just an iceberg that hit. It was a lot more than that. And I think 23andMe has a lot of lessons to share as well. Segment 4, the market does not forgive. Now let's talk about the market. Just like nature, the market does not forgive. It doesn't reward good intentions, but the market does reward value. It does reward adaptability. It does reward trust. And in this example of 23andMe, the trust was broken. They failed to be adaptable. And then their value basically eroded. So looking at the business model, they didn't create recurring revenue. They failed to do that. And that was the hubris. That was the fact that they themselves were a disruptive company. They felt untouchable. And then things happened and their revenues began to degrade. And then boom, enter the data breach. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. It was already going downhill. They have raised a ton of money with their IPO. And when you do that without a long-term vision, you basically have no long-term financial discipline. And that's very clear in what happened in this situation. The idea that they are basically let their database be exploited by hackers, that was something that is beyond me. And in my experience, when I ran my company, we grew very quickly, and it was my own hubris that thought, well, this is amazing. I'll hire more people. I'll get a big building. I'll keep on building, and without really having an eye on the fact that the market could shift. The market did shift. Our customers no longer needed us. We were an external engineering company. We'd come in and support companies in their own projects, and especially in smaller companies. Well, eventually they started to bring engineering in-house and need us less, and that was the beginning of the end for me. And these are life lessons that I'm using now to open the door for you so that you won't go into the same place I went to. Now, there's a great quote by Marcus Aurelius that says, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." There's a massive amount of power in that statement, because you have power over your mind, not over the world around you. And once you do that, you get the strength. And so bringing it down, 23andMe did not fail because they were hacked. They failed because they didn't control what they could have controlled. And that was their downfall. Segment 5, lessons for entrepreneurs and business leaders. Now, I wanted to break down the situation with 23andMe and condense it in a handful of lessons that you can take away from what happened. At Profectory, we use these case studies like 23andMe, like a more broad version in quantum computing, and we have other ones that we're going to be producing very soon as well. We use these case studies to illustrate real life examples that, at least in our situation, looking backwards, right? It's almost like a post-mortem. It's an autopsy, but in the hopes that it will help you looking forward. There's a reason why windshields are this big and rearview mirrors are this big, right? And so for us, this is a great example for tons of takeaways. The first of which is, trust is your product. Value is embodied in lots of ways, and there's value delivery. One of my mentors at Spark Partners, when I was working with him, is I really came to understand a very clear difference between value and value delivery. Now, part of the value, it's like mixed in with the value, is trust. And there's a great example of the McDonald's back in the day. They tried to come up with a fancy hamburger. They called it the Arch Deluxe. They hired some chef to come in, some like renowned chef, and he spent months and months developing this new hamburger, right? It was supposed to be higher level, more expensive, and had better ingredients and so forth. And then they ran a $200 million ad campaign to go forward and tell people that McDonald's was growing up. Even to the fact that Ronald McDonald was playing golf and shunning away kids that were running up to him. And it eroded the trust that people had in McDonald's. People took their kids to McDonald's. And now this massive ad campaign was telling him that Ronald McDonald was growing up and that he no longer wanted to have this whole children market. It was ridiculous. The trust was broken. Second thing, Memento Mori, no company is immortal. We have talked about this in many, many ways at Spark Partners when I was there. And the idea of the fact that GE and Sears and Toys R Us and all these companies that were once really foundational in the world, in the market, are now just memories. A company like Kodak that was massive, that had this reach, and is now just basically a shell of what it once was. Here again, 23andMe. We'll look back and use this as a case study of a meteoric rise and a meteoric fall as well. So this idea of early success You get arrogant, you get cocky, you think that you're untouchable, you get the Midas touch, and in the end, that's what brings you down. You've got to really think about being vigilant and being humble in that situation. Number 3, prepare for what you fear most. Now, for 23andMe, they should have protected that data in like Fort Knox. It should have been their number one thing they focused on. And the fact that the data breach occurred opened the gate of damnation. And that was their end, right? I mean, it wasn't that they were already falling, but that was the gate that opened, and it was the straw that broke the camel's back. And you need to be vigilant, need to stay on point. And it was their Achilles heel. They should have diversified their revenue streams way before any of that happened. And they didn't. They had all that money and they went a mile deep, inch wide. They should have spread out more, spread the revenues, come up with some recurring revenue. And we wouldn't be talking about this right now if they would have done that. Number 4, you were not your valuation. So their $6 billion valuation is meaningless because now they're worth $20 million, right? There's so many companies that had this massive valuation that ultimately failed to stay aligned with their value, did not shift when the market shifted. They were basically proud to the fact that they had risen to this amazing valuation. And by doing so, they shut down so many opportunities. So we need to be humble. Just like we as people need to be humble, companies need to also be humble. And that humility comes with really opportunities, open doors. And those doors are closed if you're proud. If you're proud that we're so powerful, we're worth $6 billion, you're proud of that, then you forsake opportunities for going in a different direction, for adding new revenue, which they should have done, and they did not. So they fell in love with their own image, and they fell for it. And number 5, adapt like it's life or death. And in this case, it was death. They did not adapt. You need to adapt. The adaptability in business is so critical. And I've seen hundreds of examples in companies that I know personally of the founders or the leadership digging their heels in because this is what we've always done things. Or this is my grandfather's company and he would never go in this new direction. Well, what they fail to see is that grandfather back in the day went a new direction from what was there already. It's sad. It's sad this adaptability isn't more ingrained in our business vernacular. It is not. It is something that I've had to learn, and I am currently running a company where we are dealing with this and we're moving in a new direction because we have to. You have to adapt, or ultimately you are going to be the last buggy whip company. Just imagine 130 years ago, there was tons of companies that made buggy whips, right? Now there's maybe 3 in the whole world. You don't want to be that. You don't want to be that company. You don't. You want to be a company that realizes that, there's this automobile coming. We better think about putting the buggy whip technology away, or that part away, and let's focus on these tires. What are these things called tires? And so you need to move in that new direction and adapt, right? It's part of business. And so I think that these lessons need to be learned, and ideally learned before you make them yourselves, these mistakes yourselves, because ultimately they can cost you your entire company. Segment 6, a Stoic call to action. We live in a data-driven market, and trust is currency. And you may not be running a genomics company. You might have a logistics or a real estate company or a corner coffee shop or a software company. But in the end, trust is currency. Protect your brand. Now, the brand trust relationship, if you think about what it is, your trust, the trust that the consumer has in you, goes through the brand, right? The brand is the keyhole. That trust goes in through the brand. And so a company like 23andMe, they failed to protect their data. That led to lots of spiraling situations where they ultimately failed. Now they're filing for bankruptcy. And that was fundamentally because they lost their trust. And remember that when you communicate who you are to the world, it's through your brand. I mentioned the McDonald's situation in the last segment. They were able to recover, but it was at a substantial cost. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that they paid out, plus hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of lost revenues. So we're probably talking about $1 billion mistake. Or when Microsoft developed the Kin, which was a competitor to the iPhone, they spent $1 billion to develop it, but they didn't really listen to their customers. They didn't listen to what the market was doing, and they ended up pulling it from the shelves 3 months after they put it on the shelves. So trust got beaten up, but they were able to recover. Other companies, smaller companies like 23andMe with a singular product, when that trust was broken, it was gone. So ask yourself, am I exposed? Are there elements in my value chain that I'm not looking at that can lead to my demise? Are there elements that are untrustworthy of how I'm showcasing my brand? Am I assuming things that aren't true? Now, bias is a very, very dangerous thing. Incorporating things around your business, your inner circle that reduce bias are only going to help you. And in the case of making these assumptions, bring in outside people to see if they can see any issues, any chinks in the armor. Bring them in and listen to them. It's a big deal. And then lastly, what are you doing today to keep and to honor and to strengthen your relationship with your customers, that trust? Are you actively engaged in improving the trust? And that isn't just necessarily a messaging from your marketing side. That also means creating excellent products. Because if you are in the business of producing things like tablets, you want to make sure that these tablets are meeting the needs of your consumers. And as the market shifts, you're meeting the needs of that new consumer. In the case of this tablet, this is an older version, but the next one will definitely have AI sewn into it. The next one will have better and more capable Wi-Fi and cell situation. And so they're adapting just like I am adapting as a consumer. So ask yourself, are you prepared for that? And then something else to keep in mind, as leaders, we don't just build an overnight success. Overnight. Let me break it down. Overnight success is never overnight. Overnight success takes months and months and years of development in place. And we don't just build this overnight, but it can be taken away overnight. That's the crazy thing. You come in, just like Anne and her team, they built this in 2006, but they were working on this for years before that. So we'll just say a good 25 years they've been working on this behind the scenes. And in the course of probably 2 or 3 years, it became unraveled. From their losing revenue in the 4 or 5 years ago to this data breach to now, it's clear to see that they lost their way, and use that as an example for yourself. Okay, so to wrap up, I hope that this was a good podcast for you, that it really opened your eyes on the world of Stoicism. And this case study of 23andMe is a great example of, there's so many lessons that are learned in this, just so many. And I ask you to think about other companies maybe closer to you, your competitors, maybe even your own company. What are things happening in your own company that can maybe lead to a breach in trust? what are your assets that you should be protecting that you're not. Use these examples, use this case study to make yourself and your company more powerful. Remember the lessons of the Stoics. And in the end, I thank you for your time. I'm Manny Teran. Thanks for listening.